A 23-year-old who has not even finished her second full season in professional basketball just made a sitting league commissioner look powerless, and the receipts are sitting inside a $3.1 billion television contract. Stay with me on this one, because the deeper you go into this story, the stranger it gets. There is a seven-figure offer that got turned down without a second thought, a broadcast commissioner who now has to answer to networks instead of the other way around, and a locker room quietly splitting into two camps that do not fully trust each other. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly how one player took control of an entire league without ever holding a press conference to announce it, and why the person supposedly in charge never saw it coming until it was already too late to stop. Before we get into it, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because this channel breaks down the business and power struggles behind the biggest names in sports before anyone else is talking about them. Now let's get into it. The unwritten rule. For most of the history of professional sports, there has been one rule nobody ever needed to say out loud. The league is always bigger than the player. The commissioner sets the tone. The institution protects itself first, and stars come and go while the structure stays exactly where it is. That rule has held up through basketball, football, and baseball for close to a century. It is why even the biggest, most powerful athletes in the world eventually learn to work inside the system instead of against it. History is full of moments where a young star tried to bend a league to their will and found out the hard way that the institution always had more staying power than any one career. That rule is now being tested in real time, and the person testing it is Indiana Fever guard Caitlin Clark. In less than 2 full professional seasons, she has generated more leverage over her own league than most athletes accumulate across an entire career. And the person supposedly running that league, Commissioner Cathy Engelbert, is reportedly dealing with a situation nobody prepared her for. Keep watching, because the way this unfolded is not what you would expect. It did not happen through conflict or through a walkout or through a single explosive interview. It happened through numbers, through decisions the league office made and later regretted, and through one player quietly declining to play by rules that no longer applied to her the way they applied to everyone else. The deal that rewrote the math. In July of 2024, the WNBA signed an 11-year media rights agreement worth roughly $2.2 billion, spread across Disney's ESPN and ABC, NBC Universal's NBC and Peacock, and Amazon Prime Video. By the time the 2026 season began, additional agreements with Paramount's CBS, Scripps' Ion, and USA Network pushed the total value of that package past $3.1 billion. The new annual average, somewhere between $200 and $280 million a year, is roughly 4 to 6 times what the league's previous media rights deal was worth, and the deal even includes reset provisions starting in 2028 that let either side push to renegotiate the terms if the league's growth outpaces what anyone projected. On paper, that is one of the biggest wins in the history of women's professional sports, the kind of number that took the league decades to reach. But look closer at why the money arrived exactly when it did. Analysts studying WNBA viewership from the 2024 season found that of the broadcasts that drew at least 1 million television viewers, the overwhelming majority featured one player. That player was Caitlin Clark. Networks do not commit billions of dollars because they admire a league's history or its decades of grinding development. They commit billions because audience data tells them precisely where the eyeballs are. And in this case, the data pointed almost entirely at one rookie out of Iowa. That single fact reshapes the entire conversation around this deal. The WNBA now has a broadcast partnership bigger than anything it has ever had, and that partnership was built substantially on the drawing power of one 23-year-old guard. Every marquee broadcast slot, every national scheduling decision, every conversation about which games get the biggest platform now runs through a filter the league office does not fully control on its own. When a network is paying that kind of money, it does not ask politely for input on scheduling. It expects results, and it knows exactly which name on the roster produces them. The offer she did not need. While the media deal was reshaping the league's finances at the top, a separate story was unfolding that revealed just as much about where the real power sits. A new offseason league called Unrivaled launched in 2025, founded by WNBA stars Nafisa Collier and Brianna Stewart, and built around a fast-paced 3-on-3 format designed to keep top American talent home during the winter instead of chasing paychecks overseas the way players had done for decades. Unrivaled wanted Caitlin Clark badly enough to put together a package reportedly worth more than $1 million in salary, plus an equity stake in the league and performance-based bonuses. A deal that dwarfed her actual WNBA salary of roughly $76,000 to $78,000 at the time. By any conventional measure, it was one of the most lucrative offers ever extended to a professional women's basketball player, and the league's own leadership had openly said they wanted her to share directly in the kind of growth she was driving across the entire sport. She turned it down. Then she turned it down again the following season. Her explanation was simple. She said she did not feel like she needed the extra exposure and that she wanted the rest instead. With endorsement income from Nike, State Farm, Gatorade, and other partners, reportedly pushing well past $10 million a year, walking away from Unrivaled cost her almost nothing financially. But it sent a message that mattered more than the dollar figure attached to it. She does not need every available platform to keep growing her brand. She can say no to offers that would define most careers, and her career keeps expanding anyway, on her terms, at her pace. For a commissioner trying to keep every corner of the WNBA ecosystem pulling in the same direction, including brand new off-season ventures built by her own players, that kind of independence from the sport's single biggest draw is not a small thing to manage quietly behind closed doors, and that was just the financial side of the story. The part that actually landed the league office in real trouble did not happen in a boardroom at all. It happened on live television, in a single answer that took less than 30 seconds to say, and it is still being talked about years later. The interview that went wrong in September of 2024, Commissioner Cathy Engelbert sat down for an interview on CNBC's Power Lunch. She was asked directly about the darker turn online conversation had taken around the rivalry between Caitlin Clark and Chicago Sky rookie Angel Reese, including racist and sexist harassment that both players were reportedly receiving on social media at the time. Instead of clearly condemning that harassment, Engelbert compared the Clark-Reese dynamic to the 1979 college rivalry between Magic Johnson and Larry Bird, describing it as a moment where two rookies had come out of a big college rivalry, one white and one black, and framing the tension as good for business because rivalry is what makes people watch. The reaction was immediate and severe. The players' union publicly rebuked the comparison within a day. Multiple players spoke out individually, criticizing the commissioner for pivoting to a marketing point instead of addressing the harassment directly. The backlash spread across sports media within a single news cycle. Engelbert sent players a private letter of apology within days, followed by a public statement saying her answer had missed the mark and that there was no place for hate of any kind in the league. But the damage to her credibility did not disappear along with the apology. She had been handed a direct opportunity to stand up for her players in a real moment of tension, and instead, she reached for a comparison built around marketing appeal. Caitlin Clark never had to say a single public word for that moment to permanently reshape how a large chunk of the audience saw the relationship between the league office and its biggest star. Think about what that did to the trust equation. Every decision Engelbert has made since that interview gets filtered through an audience already primed to assume she will choose optics over her players when it counts. That is an incredibly difficult reputation to shake, and it set the tone for almost everything that followed. A rookie season under fire. That interview did not happen in a vacuum. It came during a rookie season in which Clark absorbed a level of physical contact that drew national attention, including hard fouls and high-profile incidents that sparked public debate over whether officiating was protecting her the way star players are typically protected in professional sports. The league did fine and suspend players over specific incidents as the season went on. But a large portion of the new audience felt the response came late, and only after public pressure had built to a point, the league could no longer quietly ignore. At the same time, several established veterans made their skepticism about Clark's impact public before she had even played a professional minute. WNBA legend Diana Taurasi famously warned before the 2024 season began that reality was coming for Clark, suggesting the jump from college stardom to professional competition would humble her the way it humbles every incoming star. It was a fair basketball point on its face, made by one of the most respected players the league has ever produced. But Taurasi herself later admitted, laughing about it on her own show a year later, that reality ended up coming for her instead, since Clark's rookie season produced Rookie of the Year honors, an all-star selection, and a playoff berth for a Fever team that had been the league's worst just 1 year earlier. That contrast, the skepticism going in and the results coming out, became one of the defining storylines of the entire season, and it hardened the divide between fans who saw Clark as an underappreciated phenomenon and veterans who felt like their own careers were being erased in real time. The Olympic roster fight. Then came the moment that may have done more to define this entire power struggle than anything else. In June of 2024, USA Basketball's selection committee left Clark off the roster for the Paris Olympics, citing her lack of senior national team experience compared to a veteran-heavy roster that included stars like Aja Wilson, Breanna Stewart, and Diana Taurasi. Committee members were direct about the reasoning, saying the selection criteria was built around basketball fit and international experience, not popularity or marketing value, and that it would have been irresponsible to factor in audience size when choosing the roster. Clark handled the snub with visible grace in public, saying she had no disappointment and that it simply gave her something to work toward. But the wider reaction told a very different story. Analysts and media figures debated for weeks whether leaving the most talked-about player in the sport off the Olympic roster was purely a basketball decision or a missed opportunity to maximize the single biggest audience event on the entire sports calendar. Even a member of the selection committee later admitted publicly that if the team were picked again, knowing what everyone now knows about her trajectory, she would be in serious consideration. That is a remarkable thing for an institution to say out loud about a player it had just excluded a few weeks earlier. Now here is where things get uncomfortable for the league office, because the fallout from that Olympic decision did not stay contained to one summer. It became part of a pattern, and broadcast partners with billions of dollars on the line do not forget patterns, even quiet ones. The broadcast booth controversy. In September of 2024, WNBA Hall of Famer Sheryl Swoopes, who had spent much of the year offering pointed and at times factually shaky criticism of Clark's college and professional achievements, was unexpectedly absent from the broadcast booth for a nationally watched Fever Wings matchup. Sports commentators, including ESPN's Stephen A. Smith, publicly speculated on air that she had been pulled from the assignment because her commentary had become a liability for a broadcast built increasingly around showcasing Clark. Swoopes herself pushed back on that framing, saying later on a podcast appearance that her broadcasting contract for that particular stretch of games had simply already ended and that she was never scheduled to call that specific matchup in the first place. Whatever the real explanation was, the speculation alone tells you something important about where this story stands. A veteran with Swoopes' resume, one of the most decorated players in league history, became the subject of a national controversy simply because her tone toward Clark did not match what a growing broadcast audience wanted from its coverage. That level of scrutiny did not exist around women's basketball commentary before this media deal, and it is not going away now that it does. The numbers that made the argument unnecessary. Strip away the personalities for a moment and look purely at the business, because the financial turnaround the WNBA experienced during Clark's rookie season is difficult to overstate. League-wide attendance climbed from an average of roughly 6,600 fans per game in 2023 to more than 9,800 in 2024. The Indiana Fever alone averaged more than 17,000 fans a game at home, outdrawing the city's NBA team in that same arena over the same stretch. League-wide merchandise sales through Fanatics jumped by more than 500% compared to the previous year, and sales of individual player jerseys, led overwhelmingly by Clark, rose by more than 1,000%. By the fall of 2024, reports showed her jersey outselling every NBA player except one, ahead of names like LeBron James and Luka Doncic during that stretch. One finance professor who studies athlete valuation estimated her total economic impact on the league could approach or even exceed $1 billion in a single year. Long-standing player requests that had gone nowhere for years, like fully chartered team flights instead of commercial travel, were suddenly approved once the revenue existed to support them. For close to 3 decades, the WNBA had operated as a league that needed direct financial support from the NBA just to stay afloat. That was the honest baseline every commissioner before Engelbert had to manage around. Clark's rookie season did not just improve those numbers, it broke that entire pattern in a single season, off the performance and popularity of one incoming player. That kind of concentrated value creates concentrated risk. If Clark suffers a serious injury, or decides to step back from certain obligations, or simply becomes frustrated enough to pull back publicly, the assumptions baked into a $3 billion broadcast deal get shaky fast. That is not a comfortable position for any commissioner to be negotiating from, and it is not one Engelbert's predecessors ever had to think about, because no single player before Clark had ever represented this much of the league's total commercial value at once. Who answers to whom now? The sponsor landscape tells a similar story. Clark's roughly $28 million, 8-year deal with Nike alone dwarfs her WNBA salary many times over, and companies including Gatorade, State Farm, and Wilson have built major marketing campaigns specifically around her image rather than the league as a whole. When a company's financial interest is tied that directly to one athlete, her team and her representatives, not the league office, become the real point of contact for major opportunities and appearances. In a traditional labor relationship, the league sets the terms and the player works within them. That dynamic gets complicated fast when one player represents an outsized share of the product's entire commercial value. The conversation between a commissioner's office and a player in that position does not run through the normal hierarchy anymore, because the leverage simply does not sit where it used to, and every party involved, from sponsors to broadcasters to the league itself, knows it even if nobody says it out loud in public. A fan base that follows one name. There is also a cultural shift happening that makes all of this harder to manage. A large share of the WNBA's newest fans arrived specifically because of Clark, not because of the league's history or its other stars. Their attachment runs to her individually, which means every league decision that appears to work against her interests, fair or not, gets read by a large and vocal audience as evidence against the institution itself. Calls for the commissioner's resignation have circulated repeatedly across social media whenever new controversies emerge, and that pressure has become part of the operating environment the league office now works inside whether it wants to or not. At the same time, Engelbert has to manage a locker room full of established veterans who spent 2 decades building this league before Clark ever arrived, many of whom understandably do not want to see their own legacies reduced to a footnote in one rookie's rise. Balancing those two audiences, the newcomers who arrived through Clark and the longtime core who built the league from nothing, may be the single hardest part of the job right now, and there is genuinely no version of it where everyone walks away satisfied. every public statement, every scheduling decision, every choice about which games get promoted becomes a test that one side or the other is guaranteed to fail. The fight over the new contract. All of this leverage came to a head in the collective bargaining fight that played out over the following 2 years. In October of 2024, right after the WNBA finals wrapped up, the Players' Union voted to opt out of its existing labor agreement, setting a deadline for a new deal before the 2026 season could safely begin. Union leadership was blunt about why, saying the league had grown so far past the terms of its old contract that staying in it would mean falling behind the very business the players had helped build. The negotiations that followed were not smooth. Multiple All-Stars, including New York Liberty forward Breanna Stewart, publicly said players felt ignored at the bargaining table, and Phoenix Mercury star Satou Sabally called one league proposal a slap in the face. Caitlin Clark, despite not holding a formal seat on the union's executive committee, showed up in person for negotiating sessions in Indianapolis anyway, one of more than 40 players who turned out for what the union called the largest in-person player presence in its bargaining history. Her presence in that room, whether or not she said a single word during the meeting, was itself a signal of how much weight her name carried in a fight over the league's entire financial structure. The two sides finally struck a deal in March of 2026, just weeks before the season was set to open, with player salaries rising sharply and a reported revenue share for players of close to 20%. Under the new terms, Clark herself becomes eligible for a Supermax contract worth roughly $1.4 million starting in 2027, a staggering jump from the $76,535 rookie salary she started her career on. When Engelbert finally announced the breakthrough, she called it a transformative step forward for players and the league alike. It was a strikingly different tone than the one she had struck in that NBC interview 18 months earlier, and it is hard not to read the shift as a commissioner adjusting to a bargaining table where her own players, led by the sport's biggest draw, now hold considerably more weight than they used to. Expansion and what comes next. The years since have brought rapid expansion. The Golden State Valkyries joined the league in 2025 for a reported record expansion fee of $50 million, with Portland and Toronto set to follow soon after, adding new markets, new ownership groups, and new layers of complexity to an already complicated power structure. Engelbert has publicly said she wants the league at 16 teams by 2028, a scale the WNBA has not operated at since the year 2000, back when it had 16 teams before contracting down to 12 by 2010. Reports have also circulated that Clark's camp is increasingly aware of the leverage it holds, with growing conversations around travel, scheduling, and workload management built to protect her availability for the game's broadcast partners most want to showcase. A year or two ago, requests like that from a player with her level of experience would have gone nowhere in a league office meeting. Today, broadcast partners with billions of dollars riding on her continued presence and good health have every incentive to make sure her concerns get heard quickly. The commissioner's office still writes the rules on paper, but increasingly, it is coordinating around a player's leverage rather than directing it from above, and that is a genuinely new dynamic in the history of this league. None of this happened through one explosive confrontation. There was no ultimatum, no walkout, no dramatic press conference announcing a shift in power. It happened through a broadcast contract, a declined offer worth millions, an apology letter nobody fully forgot, and a locker room quietly dividing along lines nobody planned for. Word is already circulating about a major decision facing the league office in the months ahead, one that people close to the situation say could either stabilize this fragile balance of power or blow it open completely. What happens next may say more about who actually runs the WNBA than anything that has happened so far, and that story is still being written. You are going to want to see how it plays out,